you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. My name is Paul Kilduff-Taylor and joining me once again is the ineffable Ian Hardingham.
Hello everyone, Happy New Year!
It's the top story.
Valve have released a list of the 100 best-selling titles on Steam for 2016. They didn't give exact sales figures, but broke them down into 4 categories: Platinum, Gold, Silver, and Bronze. I look forward to those becoming annoying categorizations that we use all the time. Did any of this surprise you, and is any of this interesting?
I found it interesting. I think it's interesting they decided to do this at all. I was surprised they decided to do this at all. I'm intrigued by what these tiers mean. I'm wondering if that means that there is like some kind of stratification that's very noticeable between, for instance, this tier that has Rocket League, GTA 5, No Man's Sky, Fallout 4 in it, and this gold tier that has Team Fortress 2 in it, Arma 3, Rainbow Six Siege, which I'm interested to see there after it was supposedly a failure. So I'm surprised by that. That's pretty cool. I don't think any specific entries surprise me. I will say that Astroneer is in this list in the bronze tier, and that was only out for a couple of weeks in 2016. So I'm wondering if this is rate. If they've organised this by number of sales or dollar sales divided by the amount of time they've been on sale.
Oh, interesting. That would surprise me given on how this has been reported. Games industry, it's developed, say, in order of the gross revenue they've made this year, but you know how reporting is. It may not be exactly those metrics. I don't have the original thing. I'm definitely under the impression this is just gross, in which case, as you say, that's extraordinary.
Yes, it's extremely impressive for Astroneer if they've managed to get up into this tier with, what else in here? Starbound, RimWorld, Factorio. These are extremely well-selling games that have had a lot of months to sell. So, yeah, as you say, the people reporting this don't necessarily have the right data. I'm interested that Total War Warhammer is in the top tier.
Yeah.
Obviously an extremely popular game. People don't tend to like it very much. I think a lot of people bought it, and a lot of people think it's okay, but think it should have been a lot better. And I'm impressed with The Division being right at the top there, which is also kind of a popular but slightly divisive game.
This whole thing is really fascinating, and I think it shows off sort of a number of different things about where we are games industry-wise. Yeah, the Warhammer, I think it was such a powerful meeting of IPs that, what I can tell from comments on that, because I was thinking of buying this, a lot of people bought it and then they were complaining about it, and the majority of replies to it are like, it's a Total War game. That's what a Total War game is. So I think a lot of people are kind of drawn in by this idea of like big scope Warhammer battles, but in fact it's just yet another Total War, which I just find really interesting anyway, and I'm still considering buying it, even though I missed the sale.
Well, the thing that turned me off, actually, because I actually have a slightly more nuanced opinion than that, which is that it's possibly fell badly between the two things, because it's also a simplified Total War. It's sort of only got 6 factions or something, and quite a lot of the stuff that's in Total War normally has been taken out. So I've seen sort of 2 kinds of complaints, and a lot of them are about people who were hoping for something very deep and sillily deep, like Total War is, that didn't have that as well. So I slightly think that they missed both possible goalposts.
Yeah, and obviously in doing so, we're very successful. But it's interesting. I will definitely have to give it a go. So yeah, the list is so fascinating because you've got things like No Man's Sky in the very top category against a lot of games. I'm going to say that budget-wise, that's probably like gross ratio of gross to budget. That's probably like the most successful game there, I would imagine. If you look at all of these others, GTA 5, Dark Souls, Dota, The Witcher, XCOM 2, Fallout 4, The Division.
In the top tier, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Stardew Valley had a better ratio. That just wouldn't surprise me that much.
Yes. No. I mean solely in the top tier.
Okay.
And because the argument has been made, even though it's been commercially successful, it's going to be like almost a canary in the coal mine for publishers trying to do something similar. Like that's a narrative that has come across since it's sort of been revealed very comprehensively that it's done well. People want to say, oh, but no one's ever going to do this again because it was so controversial and it wasn't worth it. Well, I'm sorry, I just think that's nonsense. I mean, if you look at the other games that's with. So to see something like that, which is it's effectively an indie title. It's an indie title with big backing. And similarly, Rocket League, that's the high point of that kind of low budget development now, I think, that you can reach, is to get up there with GTA 5. Which is just kind of astonishing to me. Then as you go down, I'd say the stuff that stands out in the next category, as you say, Stardew Valley, everyone kind of knows about that. But Stellaris as well, so it sort of seems like some of the more consciously commercial stuff that doesn't have a mega budget can also hit up there. You've got to be disappointed if you're Dishonored 2, because if you look down here at where Dishonored 2 is, there's a kind of a bunch of stuff clustering around it, which makes me think, that really wasn't where they were expecting to be. YouTuber's life, but even stuff like Starbound, Terraria, Undertale.
Yes, the bronze tier is definitely starting to get some games that just aren't particularly good, and some games you haven't heard of as much. Whereas the tiers above that are kind of the sort of the AAA in some terms. The bronze tier has Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2, as you say, YouTuber's Life, which is a bit strange, and a bunch of stuff that is very popular in other territories to ours. Whereas pretty much everything above this tier is just sort of globally very successful. So I think the bronze tier feels very different to the tiers above it. Yeah.
Firewatch recently announced that they sold 1 million units. I guess that's across every platform, because Firewatch is here in the bronze tier. I'm just sort of thinking, my takeaway from this is really, with an indie game, what can you aim for realistically? What's your high point? And it seems that's pretty high. If you have something that's going to hit those kind of AAA buttons, as both Rocket League and No Man's Sky do. I mean, Rocket League is kind of the outlier of all outliers. It almost shouldn't be talked about, really, that it's possible to get up there. I mean, I actually feel very encouraged by this, sort of from a developer and publisher standpoint. This makes me happy, because there's a lot of diverse, different stuff in this list. There's a lot of different genres in this list. And as you say, there's a lot of quality in it. There's not sort of... You don't look at this and go, this game doesn't deserve to be here. I think for pretty much anything. Yes, you could say, some of the things in the bronze category you may not like, but to me it feels encouraging.
Yeah, I agree. I think it shows how healthy Steam is. There's a lot of very good AAA games here. Quite a few good indie games, maybe slightly fewer than I might have expected. I don't want to start some massive conversation about the definition of indie. I don't know if I think Rocket League is straight indie for me. It's a very high budget game, and it's from an experienced, quite a big team. I understand it may not have a publisher, but it doesn't feel the same in the same category as... Yeah, and it's even No Man's Sky or something like RimWorld. Again, I don't want to go down a crazy path of definitions.
I mean, so I didn't know this until I just stealth Googled it. Rocket League's budget was $2 million.
Right.
So, that you can say about that what you will. I think a lot of people would agree with you. That's $2 million with a big-ish team is not an indie game, but it's an interesting category of budget, certainly, that you generate sort of over 50 million. This was, this is a recent article, so 50 million kind of being the high score at that point. That's a good return.
I mean, I think that it's a testament to what the ecosystem is like right now, that Rocket League can be made at all, because obviously the fact that they had $2 million, that they could make this game with that budget in some ways, because it's using UDK. It's obviously a very good looking game. 2 million is on the is on the cheap side for even like a AA game, I think it's fair to say. But it just speaks to how the new world, with being able to publish yourself, being able to have such direct contact with the platform holders, enables you to make all sorts of weird kind of gambles. I mean, again, Rocket League is the follow-up to a game that did not do very well. I can't remember. You may know which game they did that gave them enough money to punt on this again, because this was such an epic failure the first time around with super-powered rocket football-playing cars, whatever it was called.
Mega cars, yeah.
I think Rocket League, despite not, in my opinion, not necessarily being a game that I would immediately call indie, is probably the Cinderella story of the year.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly which of Grimm's fairy tales you'd use to describe No Man's Sky. Just going back to your original point about the people saying there's not going to be another No Man's Sky, I share your feelings that that's a crazy concept. I would like to know what the next thing that actually feels like No Man's Sky is, because it's hard to do. It's hard to get a concept that resonates so massively and do all of the different things that they did. I mean, of course, everyone who has a business background is not looking at No Man's Sky's story and sort of shying away. They're looking at it and thinking, how can I do this while turning off my phone at night so I don't have to worry about people tweeting at me? But it's going to be hard to... No Man's Sky has taken the oxygen out of the room for that specific kind of game. So you have to find something else that's so exciting.
Right, it's the law of the category again, isn't it? Because No Man's Sky really made its own category with this sort of omni-space game thing. And then, yes, now everything that looks like that is in the category of No Man's Sky. I mean, just thinking about this, it's Sony. They've done it before. They did it with Media Molecule. They did basically exactly the same thing, which was take a developer who was doing something interesting on their platform already and go, we're going to buy you effectively, although they didn't do that with Hello. We're going to invest a huge amount of money in you to be sort of our thing. That's interesting to me. If anything, it's going to make them do it again. And they seem to be good at finding those big, new category concepts to do that
That's
with.
True. I mean, a lot of the No Man's Sky story was told before Sony got involved, though. That first trailer was so important to setting the scene, and I think setting the expectations that have caused all these problems. Whereas something like Media Molecule was more led by them. Anyway, I'm just.
I don't know the timeline though, because certainly some people from Sony have talked in public about them seeing basically that trailer before the trailer came out.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know the timeline on their involvement. But it's interesting. Yeah, as you say, people are going to be looking at this list and they're going to be thinking, how am I going to get into that platinum tier? Well, it's such an interestingly diverse tier. There's a hardcore strategy game in there. What they've done with XCOM as a franchise is absolutely amazing. I mean, they've done absolutely phenomenal work with it, and it could have gone so very wrong. They've managed to AAA-ify a game from that PC era, and I don't think anyone else has, really.
Yeah, I don't think a developer, unless you're Blizzard or Activision, should be aiming for the top tier. Certainly most developers will be happy with being in this top 100. And again, looking at the bronze tier, looking at how many weird things there are in there, Euro Truck Simulator's in there, something called Slime Rancher is in there, a lot of older games that just sell very well in sales every couple of months are in there. But, there are no rules here. There's nothing to say that you have to make X, Y, or Z genre to do well. Steam's a really fast-moving marketplace. People who are the kind of hardcore gamers that drive the sales of these games, their tastes move quite quickly. Maybe not their tastes, but the things they're ready for move quite quickly. They want things that are new and exciting, and they want other things as well. But yeah.
Yeah, fine. I mean, I can talk about this all day, which is why it's the top story. But one final thing. I've mentioned a kind of diversity in the list, but if you look at it, the Men with Guns games are still really dominating. Counter-Strike, The Division, I guess you could call XCOM 2 that to some extent. Team Fortress, Call of Duty, Warframe, Doom, H1Z1, Rainbow Six Siege, all at the top. So it's still like there is still this core of like military men with guns doing stuff. I think if you don't know what aesthetic to make, if you pick that, then that's probably a good starting point. Do you think that's a fair comment?
Sure, yeah. Lessons from the lessons to learn from this, yes, make a Men with Guns game or buy the Civilization IP.
Well, so that would make some people sad, but I don't know. I kind of like that there's a sort of neutral aesthetic in some ways. Is that a neutral aesthetic? I'm going to upset everyone if I carry on talking about this, including you, so I'm going to stop.
Okay.
Dan Schmidt has spoken to Permanent Beta about his experiences developing the technologically ambitious and ahead of its time FPS Terra Nova Strike Force Centauri. We're big fans of that game around here. Did you learn anything from this?
Well, yeah, I'm using this as a jumping off point to just talk about Terra Nova. This interview is by Alex Connolly, who is a big fan of this particular show, and it's a fairly old article now, but I believe you can still, at the time of this recording, buy Terra Nova for $1.50 on Steam, which is a great deal. And it led me and Alex to talk on Twitter about the death of Looking Glass, which really was sad. And apparently in this interview, I have to be honest, I haven't read this whole interview yet. Apparently the guy being interviewed, Dan Schmidt, says that Terra Nova was the first thing that was putting nails in the coffin of Looking Glass, even though it was released, a good 7 years before Looking Glass actually died, and was released even before they released Thief 1. We love Looking Glass. Looking Glass had a lot of failures that are a bit like Dishonored 2 this year and Titanfall 2. Really great games. Really great concepts that somehow just didn't sell enough. They never managed to nail it properly, and they were just a company that always seemed to be in peril of one kind or another, despite the fact that the games that they make are truly loved, including Terra Nova.
Yeah, the other people sort of around at that time, Seamus Blackley, Ken Levine, Warren Spector, Harvey Smith, who you just mentioned, with Dishonored. There seems to be this trend with these games and these designers of wanting to have something to do with the world be extra compelling. I think that's the kind of broadest trend that Looking Glass kind of took. It was a kind of design focus, but underneath the design focus there was a setting that made you want to go in. They were very kind of big on role-playing stuff with the heritage from Ultima and those kind of games. And I think that's what drew me to Terra Nova so much initially as well, was that it had this ridiculous story. Absolutely, just proper bargain basement DVD sci-fi action story with the FMV, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. On top of this kind of wing commander in mechs, it was just exactly what whatever-year-old me wanted at the time, which meant it wasn't commercially successful.
Yeah, and just so smooth to play and kind of pleasurable to start playing. There were quite complicated objectives, but they were communicated fairly well.
Yeah.
It's just one of those games which I didn't work, obviously, but is one of the few games that I feel is still underrated. It doesn't have quite the sizable cult status I think it deserves.
Yeah, there were a couple of things mechanically that I really loved about it. The first was when you got into the game, you realised that it was basically FPS controls. And the only other sort of mech stuff that people had played was things like Earthsiege and Mech Warrior, which were much more like flight sims. You had to learn this huge number of controls. It was very indirect. It was kind of satisfying to feel like you were moving this big machine around. But in Terra Nova, you could just do it. You could just jump in and click on stuff and shoot it. And that was really liberating. So that immediately it was almost like a Blizzard thing. It was like, this is unnecessarily hard to control, so we'll just make the controls easy, and then we'll make the gameplay on top of that. And the second thing was that every mission had a twist in it. There was something I read recently by one of Double Fine's designers, and it was a checklist that he had for levels. And it was something like overall design, aesthetic twist, and then mid-mission twist. And he'd always put one in. And that's what this game did really well. So you'd go off on a mission, and by the second stage of the mission, everything would have gone wrong, and you would be overrun with enemies, or one of your force had deserted, or something would have happened. So you always had this interesting challenge. And it didn't matter. The thing they found out was it doesn't matter if you play the mission again, if you fail, and that happens again. It doesn't undermine it, because it's still cool, even if you know it's happening. So really great design.
Absolutely.
There we go. That's the end of that. Let me just find my bell.
Find your bell.
I found it. PC Games Zen have written an article about how Bethesda's modular and kit-based approach to level design enables them to build vast and detailed worlds quickly and efficiently. Now, I think this is so fascinating. This, as I said, PC Games, then go and check this article out. Because to me, it really showed some of the sort of advantages and disadvantages of the Bethesda approach. What did you think of this?
Yeah, I agree. It's difficult to talk about the triumphs of the system that leads to Skyrim's dungeons especially, and Fallout 4's dungeons, without also talking about how problematic they are. Obviously, Bethesda have gone down the path of having massive worlds with lots of dungeons, and the dungeons being relatively boring. Once you've seen one, you've kind of seen a lot of them. Bethesda do their best job with content, I think, with their missions, which they do pretty well of making strange and weird and diverse, and their overworlds, which are also really great right now. I think the dungeons are still pretty boring. That's partially because the combat is such that the levels aren't really particularly impactful to the combat. So you get a game like Spelunky, for instance, or even Frozen Synapse, for instance, where a very, very slight change in geometry makes a massive difference to the actual gameplay. That's just not the case in Bethesda's games. The combat doesn't allow that to happen, so that makes it much harder for them. And obviously, you want to go down into a random dungeon and find something exciting and new every time. You can't have that. I think Bethesda still don't have enough exciting, unique stuff that you find. Like, I'd like that to happen a bit more often. And also, I kind of still think that Bethesda don't quite get weapons right. Like, I think Diablo 1 had the perfect sort of generative weapon system where every hour or two you would find something very exciting and new. And I don't know the last time I've been excited by getting a weapon in a Bethesda game, honestly. They managed to make them feel very, very unexciting, so I'd like to see them fix that. Anyway, that was quite rambling. It's good they've got this system. These games are great. It's important to remember that it is a privilege to have these games coming out, to play them, because they're so exciting. But for me, this much more spurs thought of how they can improve than spurs celebration of what they've done.
Yeah, something I found interesting about this. So they produce these kits. So a lot of the artists are kind of there to make kits, and then there's a very small team. Actually, I can't remember how many people it is. It says in the article, very surprisingly small team who make all of the dungeons out of these kits, and that just to me is a sort of fascinating interaction. As you say, it does seem to be like an opportunity for improvement. So that's kind of about how you organize your team and how the team considers their role. So you've got the kit artist making all these bits and then the person putting it together. And it seems like, I don't know, if you worked on the synergy of that team, if you changed the size of it, if you had different kinds of kit artists, if you brought in at the end of the project like people who had never made a dungeon before and you got them trained quickly and they made weird stuff that you hid in the game, that kind of thing where you shake up that dynamic a bit could make something really interesting. I really agree with you on loot in Bethesda games. Just playing Skyrim again, I've been through a few of the sort of bigger quest lines now, and because I've seen all the story I want to see, I have literally got no incentive to keep playing because I'm not going to find surprising loot. The only sort of interesting dungeons in that game are the Dwemer ones, with the kind of crazy mechanical dwarves. And I've been to a few of those in my various playthroughs, and I read about them. And I really like how they've done it. There's like 7 big ones, and they're all kind of hidden with side quests and so on. So I like that, but then that's kind of the most interesting secret in the game, and then you're done. So there just isn't enough surprise in those games anymore.
Yeah, and it's tough. It just gets harder. The more they produce, the more you get to understand their systems, and the less exciting everything is. So something new has to come along to disrupt everything.
Exactly. According to Eurogamer, tassologists, thanks producer Jimmy, Newzoo, have estimated that Super Mario Run earned $30 million in its first 2 weeks on sale. They also divined that it had been downloaded 90 million times and had a conversion rate of 3.4%. Over at gamesindustry.biz, EDAR have been doing some of their own analysis, and I like EDAR. They seem to be pretty accurate. They say App Annie's early results show Super Mario Run generating $14 million in revenue in the first 3 days of its release. Nintendo confirming the game was downloaded over 40 million times. That is a conversion rate of 3.5%, so they are in agreement there. My question to you, sir, is do you think that they should have tried to make more money than that with Super Mario Run?
I don't know how to answer that. I think that it's a reaffirming of life that a Mario mobile game does well. I'm kind of intrigued by what Nintendo are going to do next, because I still don't feel like they are fully embracing mobile, actually. I feel like they are sort of doing it slightly grudgingly, with an understanding of how much money they would leave on the table if they didn't do it. But they're still more interested in making exciting new IP games for the Switch, which of course we celebrate, and that's excellent. It would be good if they were able to do both without sort of undermining their IP in the long run. I mean, Mario is Mickey Mouse at this stage, and has been for a long period of time, so you probably can't ruin Mario as long as you make the games decent. You can just have him everywhere that you want. And I put him in as many different genres as they can make. Make a free-to-play MOBA on the mobile with Mario. That's absolutely fine. But, sooner or later, isn't someone at Nintendo going to look at the mobile business and say, this is making us hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and look at their hardware business and say, this is causing us a huge amount of heartache, and be like, it's time to pull the trigger?
So kind of returning to my first question, I think you're right, and this smacks of a tentative intro to this market. Like, you have to call that a success, I think. I think it's been good for Mario as keeping him alive as a character and making a solid game that people like. I absolutely detest the game, by the way. I'm not going to let that get in the way of this. I just want to vent and say that I think it's actually a bad and boring game. Good luck, everyone with that opinion. So it's not going to, for normal people who aren't me, it's not going to hurt Mario, because a lot of people like this game, and I think they like the monetization method. You can play it, whatever. People complain that it's too expensive. That seems to be noise to me. It's perfectly fine to play it.
Oh my goodness, it's $9.99. I didn't realize that. It's $10.
Yeah. People complained about that incessantly on the internet, but I really don't think that matters.
I think this is mischaracterized as a free-to-play game if you get the first 3 levels free and then you just pay a flat fee to unlock the rest of the game. Like, I kind of...
Nobody serious is calling this a free-to-play game.
Okay, good.
They're basically calling it a premium game, which it is. So I understand why, if you work in mobile and you see this, I can understand you being angry about it. Like, if you are a mobile publisher and you want to write your angry think piece about how this is dumb, then please do that. Like, that's completely fine. Comparing it to Pokemon Go, no, I don't think that's even slightly relevant. Something that's an actual cultural phenomenon isn't something that you can aim for. It is a stark difference. 600 million against 30 million is a big difference.
Yeah, they don't feel like very similar products at all. They've got different business models. I am actually a little stunned by $9.99. I'm not saying that it's a bad move. I am surprised that's the right price point. I would have thought they would make more money at $5 actually, but my data on that may be out of date. That's just a lot of money for a mobile game. And
well, this is the thing. Yes, this is the thing, because people were complaining about it massively, and analysts were complaining about it massively, and now this has arrived, and the analysts can go, aha, well, we said, that was bad. So that was them trying to be different. That was their way of doing it differently.
Well, I guess they're going to keep trying. They've had, what was their first mobile thing? What was it called? It was the Miitomi or something?
Yeah, Miitomi, yeah.
And that was really interesting, and that was kind of... That felt more like a Nintendo product than this does. Because this feels like a fairly boring Nintendo-branded game. Whereas both Miitomi and, in a slightly different way, Pokemon Go felt like Nintendo trying to embrace the new technology in a different way. Now, Pokemon Go isn't really made by Nintendo, so that's slightly different. But they did choose the company who makes it, and the company already had this game. And I'm sure in their pitch said... Pokemon Go is going to be quite a lot like this game, and I think Nintendo probably had some oversight on that. So, Nintendo have real magic working for them, and we would all rather that they kept on trying to do very strange things in mobile, because they might be the guys who work out what the next big genre that doesn't exist is yet. They may be the ones who work out how to make augmented reality really work, because both Miitomi and Pokemon Go felt like they were big breakout hits in AR. And now I'm actually not so sure. Like, Miitomi's kind of been relegated to a bit of a curio. Pokemon Go, it's going to take years to try and work out exactly what's going on with Pokemon Go, what happened with Pokemon Go. and trying to work out, it was an amazing novelty, but is it now the augmented reality stuff, is that now actually sort of working against it to a certain extent? Anyway, again, I'm jabbering. I hope they keep experimenting, probably not with boring endless runners that cost $10. Wow.
If you look at Mario Run, and I'm just imagining the range of designs that you could do with that. Like, I'm sure there's some proper free-to-play models you could apply to it. Do you think there's a point at which, if you're Nintendo, someone comes to you with a very heavily free-to-playified, like let's imagine something that people think is a bit gross. They complain about it. Sort of, a kind of Supercell style monetization, maybe worse than Supercell. Do you think there's a point at which you go, morally, as a company, this is not in accordance with our values, and we're not going to do it? Do you think that's a real conversation they could have?
I think Nintendo has that conversation. Yeah, I think Nintendo has very strong internal ethics. I think they might be a bit strange. But yeah, absolutely. I don't think they would be... I think the guys at the top of that company have... I don't know what the right word for it is. I think they have pride in not doing what the most basic commercialism is. And I think they've shown that over a long period of time. So I think they would blanch against that sort of almost by default, whether or not it was a good or a bad thing. I mean, I don't know what the right design for a free-to-play Mario game is. I mean, Super Mario Maker has been very successful recently on the 3DS and the Wii U, and that's got sort of lots of ways you could monetize that. Now, obviously, that's not a sort of hugely mainstream game, I suppose you would say. Maybe not enough to be a big FTP success, but that's got so many different bits you can use to create your levels and so many different levels that you could find a very, I think, ethical way of F2Ping that.
Now, there's a sort of disconnect here, because let me imagine, like, what's the absolute worst thing that could happen for Nintendo sort of values-wise is that they make a game that kind of parents think is bad for their kids. They will never, ever do that, because that was like the absolute foundation of them moving into America, was that they found a way of appealing to parents and families, and they wanted to be positioned like Disney as a family company. But then you've got that in contrast to Pokemon Go, which does have, you have had these stories about like kids paying lots of money in Pokemon Go. So I just feel like maybe they're actually really wrestling with their own value system, although maybe Pokemon Go is sort of distant enough from the Nintendo brand that they kind of like, oh, what the hell, let's just go for it. It just seems like a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I just want to see what they keep doing. Maybe they try something really dramatically different again with Zelda. Maybe they just stick with Mario and Pokemon for now because they don't want to risk anything. Although, again, it's going to have a big impact how well Switch does. And I don't think either of us think Switch is going to do life-changingly, amazingly for Nintendo. I think it's going to do better, but similarly to the Wii U, in all honesty. And I don't know how it's going to impact the 3DS, which is a very successful platform for them. But it feels like they're going to have to keep going into mobile because they're going to be making so much more money on mobile, and they're going to keep experimenting. And I would be interested to see what the most, in inverted commas, bad FTP thing they do is.
Jeffrey Matchliffe quite likes at least one part of microtransaction design for F2P third-person action game Let It Die. Now, I've been hearing a lot about this game, and I'm going to try it at some point soon. Apparently, if you die in the game, you can either start again from scratch for free or use various types of in-game currency to resurrect your current character. As the game is somewhat randomized, having to start again from scratch is not as much of a chore as it might initially seem. Do you have any interest in Let It Die?
Yeah, this is quite interesting. I mean, obviously, the most obvious link is to arcade machines, which would always basically let you resurrect yourself for another 25 cents. So it's a thing that exists already in games. I kind of think it's crazy that you would do that. I mean, I never wanted really to do that. I mean, pinball's my favourite arcade pastime, and that would always have the option of buying another ball. And I would never do that. I mean, you want your high score to be your high score, and paying money to get a higher score is just really, really silly to me. But I have learnt over the years that is not silly to other people. So if this is working, this is interesting. I mean, again, F2P is so weird. It's just so weird. It's kind of... So much of it is about trying to get you to pay money in a way that forces you to pay money. And it's just problematic like that. And that's why I like things where you pay money for new stuff and you get new stuff if you've paid money, and if you don't, you don't. And then it doesn't mess around with the fundamental mechanics. But, you know, I go into Subway, the sandwich restaurant, and they have all of these upsells, which are just like F2P stuff. Blah, 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 blah. It's all very complicated. I like premium, basically. And I'm yet really to see a situation where F2P isn't just mainly a clutch to try and get more people invested before asking for them to pay, which is fine. It's the way it has to be sometimes. But I find it hard to get very passionate about designing the right kind of F2P for those reasons.
This is interesting because the choice to die in the game is a really interesting one, and the writer kind of takes you through why that is. So re-rolling a new character, because it's procedurally generated, is not sort of the pain that he thought it was. It's not sort of punishment for dying. It's just, you know, a question of changing, you know, whether you want to continue or not. And that's interesting to me. Like that does feel a bit new. This entire game looks completely crazy, which is fitting because it's made by Grasshopper Manufacturer. And procedurally generated survival game, I think procedurally generated F2P survival game has got to be like the end point of a particular genre, surely.
Definitely, and I'm thoroughly amused that the things that you buy to resurrect you are called death metals. Very good.
Very, very good indeed. A topic which can only be from producer Jimmy now, but we're going to roll with it.
It's actually from me.
That's not possible, man.
Yes.
I can't believe it. Standards Group HDMI Forum, Inc., which is a real thing, have announced the final specification for HDMI 2.1. Along with the usual resolution bump, the biggest new feature in the standard is support for variable refresh rates, like FreeSync or G-Sync for the PC. I don't know what those things are. This means that TVs and monitors that support HDMI 2.1 can display frames more or less as soon as they're ready, which will eliminate screen tearing. What do you think about this?
We don't do a lot of hardware on this show.
For good reason.
But I find HDMI kind of exciting in some way. I'm glad HDMI exists. I'm glad it's going to be using the same plug. I just kind of wanted to talk about this. So obviously HDMI already supports 4K. Now it supports 8K and 10K, things that I don't particularly think exist. But there you go. But yeah, this actually, you scoff, but this sort of dynamic frame stuff is actually pretty important. Like this is the future of basically displaying frames as they arrive. It's quite important to understand how much better that is than taking a variable frame rate coming out of the graphics card and trying to make it sit with whatever a fixed refresh on your monitor is, and how bad that is, and how much better it is when you don't do that. It might mean the death eventually of 30 and 60 FPS as things. Maybe 47 FPS will be a thing for a short period of time. And, you know, HDR is happening. I just think that we came from a time in the 90s where all of this stuff was so terrible and you had to get a new connector every 3 years and they were always bad. I'm just glad HDMI is here. Thank you, HDMI.
I've had to get new HDMI connectors for every new monitor that I've bought in the last 3 years. So I don't know what you're talking about. That's nonsense. No, I'm going to be serious for a second here. Screen tearing is basically kind of the last frontier of this stuff. And it is something that even me, as a complete idiot and Luddite, I notice screen tearing quite a lot, especially in games which otherwise look amazingly beautiful. Something like Dishonored 2, which is the best looking game. You know, I'm able to play that at proper settings, and it has some amazing stuff in it, like something that I think is called chromatic aberration that I've not really seen before. Like I've started noticing stuff like that, and you know, waves look really good in that game, and all the stuff. And then you spin the camera around, and you've got screen tearing, and it seems to be like the thing that they could never fix. And those clever people, they fixed it now. So I really want to see what it's like without screen tearing. That is going to make a big difference to me. And I like 4K, so that's kind of and also like I'm gonna get on board with this as well, because as you say, standardization is good. The ultimate data transfer system is MIDI. Everyone knows that.
Is that right?
The reason that MIDI has been around since 1978, whenever it was invented, is because it just works, and everything has the same plugs, and it's wonderful. So everything should have one standard. I'm looking at you, video codecs, where everything just works. And then that standard gets better or worse based on the hardware that's available. And that's it. I'm done.
I managed to break the security chain between the Xbox One and my TV somehow, because you know that HDMI has
Yes.
this thing, and I was changing the graphics mode on the Xbox and my TV at the same time, and some part of the HDMI standard decided that I was doing something bad, and I had to restart everything, and that was the only time that's happened. So the security stuff hasn't really caused me many problems. Yes, this was your first and last ever hardware segment on Visiting the Village.
I think it went okay. I'm surprised that caused the security stuff to break. I have like a kind of $3 switcher that I bought on eBay attached to my TV that switches between my PS4 and my Xbox, and that didn't break the security chain. So I'm surprised you managed.
Well, I probably can't do it again.
Good. That's the end of that. We don't have a film and television lounge area this time, which I think is kind of sad, but we're going to move on anyway. No games were released this week in 2007, according to Eurogamer, so we're blissfully spared that. I noticed we ticked over the year there. I wasn't consulted. We've got the top
It's 10
11
years ago, Mr. Paul Kilduff Taylor.
Well, yes, I'm aware of that. I didn't know that this feature was going to continue beyond 2006.
Wait, you just thought it would end at the... Oh, wow.
God, yes. I was really looking forward to it. But no, it's still there.
Alas,
We've got the top 11 UK Steam games now. I don't ask questions anymore. I just read out what they write down for me. And number 11, it's DC Universe Online Trademark Ultimate Edition 2016.
Yawn.
At number 10, it's Stardew Valley, which I should get on PS4, but haven't yet. Number 9 is Arma 3 Apex. Number 8 is The Binding of Isaac Afterbirth. Good to see that back again. I need to play some more of that. It's a great game. Number 7, Grand Theft Auto 5. Number 6, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim Special Edition. Number 5, Total War Warhammer Realm of the Wood Elves. Number 4, Sid Meier's Civilization 6. Number 3, NBA 2K17. Is that just... okay. Planet Coaster at number 2. And The Binding of Isaac Rebirth Complete Bundle at 9% off at number 1. Edmund Macmillan must just live in a palace full of like cartoon plush placentas that he rolls around on at this point.
I am honestly surprised that Binding of Isaac has the power to be number 1 on Steam when a new thing is released. I was not aware that it was quite at that level.
People just are still playing it. That's the thing. It must have, out of all those kind of indie games, I think it has sort of some of the best retention. And maybe, there's money left on the table with Spelunky. Like, what if he'd done expansion packs for Spelunky?
There's definitely money left on the table with Spelunky.
That's pretty terrible, though, isn't it? Like, I mean,
wants to write a book about it instead.
Why didn't he get someone else to make them, like Edmund Macmillan did with Binding of Isaac?
Exactly. Why not?
I mean, that's what you do, guys. Don't leave money on the table. No listener questions this week because every time I ask you for questions, it's just rubbish. It's just rubbish. Brings the whole tone of the show down. I'm sure I'll do it again. So that's it. That's it for this week. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.